Hey, Katie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Yes, thank you for making time in your very, very busy schedule. But when I found out about your new book, I was super excited because I have been going down my own rabbit hole of the Manosphere and all things boys and online and all the things. And so I devoured your book and I was so excited to have you on the show to talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you. I so appreciate it. There's a lot in there.
There really is. It's so timely. So, and you've been on the show before. So listeners, I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to the other conversations we've had with Katie. You'll find links in the show notes pages, but I really want to dive right into this book that you've written and just gotten out into the world. And listeners, it's called Breaking the Boy Code, the new playbook for raising resilient boys. So timely. And I would love to hear a little bit of the backstory of your why for writing this book.
So there's a lot of whys for writing this book. I will start with the biggest one probably in my life, which is a story you know, but your listeners probably don't. So I'll just share the Cliff Notes version of it. So when I was 23 years old, my father died by suicide. And it was 1998 at the time. And we had basically no language for it. It was at that time, a death by suicide was very, shameful. There was a lot of stigma around it. I grew up in the Catholic Church. That's no longer my jam, but I grew up in the Catholic Church. So we had a Catholic funeral. It all felt very like we were just trying to get through, right? And I will say that the church we grew up in did a lovely job of helping my mom and the four of us sort of like get through this traumatic event. But once the funeral was over, we were just left to sit there in shame. And so for almost 3 months, my mom would say that he had a heart attack. It was very difficult for her to find the words. And then I would feel like, Mom, we have to, like, that's not true. We have to figure out how to talk about this. And, when my little sister was only 17 at the time. So she was graduating high school. I mean, literally within a month of him dying, we had to graduate her from high school and sort of figure out where she was going to go next and what was happening next for her. And it was all a lot. My two other siblings were older and living in Chicago and LA. So, it was me and my mom sort of picking up the pieces. And as we went through all of his things, as we were cleaning out the room and moving out of the house, there was a lot that had to be done very quickly. And so we moved my mom to a different place. And as she and I were going through all this, we were reading all these cards that the four children had given to him over the years for birthdays, Father's Day. And the theme in these cards was always, I'm sorry, this was a hard year. Next year will be better. And so even though we didn't know, and I would say none of us knew the degree to which he was struggling, we knew something wasn't right because we kept saying that. And my mom and I sat there in tears, like reading these cards and thinking, well, how did we not know? And the how is because in 1998, men did not discuss mental health. They didn't get treatment for mental health. They didn't discuss it. They didn't have words for depression, anxiety, any of that. So, I often reflect back on that and think we've got to create a better world for young boys growing up now where they feel that they can come forward for help, where they can say, I'm really struggling. And I have a 17-year-old son. And his name is Liam. His middle name is James, that named after my father. And sometimes that feels big, having that middle name. And sometimes I think it just feels like, oh, it's part of my personality. But I have really raised him to talk about feelings, which if you have a teenage male identifier in your house, that that's not easy. And he is what is considered, a gifted learner. And so, from a neurodevelopmental perspective, he's different. He thinks differently and learns differently, and that's okay. But I really wanted him. So if you have a child like that in your home, that that's an extra layer of how do you make sure that they are talking about the big stuff. So he has spent his 17 years like with me really checking in on like, but how do you really feel? And like, okay, but tell me more about this. Tell me more about that. And we've found our way, and it's been ups and downs, nothing perfect, but we have found our way for him to come to me when he's ready to talk about something that's hard, and for me to check in a way that doesn't feel intrusive. But I work with, teens, tweens, and young adults. And I work with so many boys, young men, who come to me and say, I just never had this opportunity and I don't know how to do this. So, we still, as much as stigma is coming down a little bit overall for some populations, not others, we have so much work to do in helping male identifying people be able to just say, I'm hurting. I don't know
Yeah.
what this is, but I am hurting.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I also just want to, before we move on, mention the article that you co-wrote with your niece. And would you just say something about that briefly? Because I'd love listeners to check that out. It was so beautiful.
Yes, that was actually Oprah Daily. And we co-wrote an article about suicide loss. So my niece is now, I think she's 25. I'm losing track. 25 years old. When she was a junior at Brown University, her boyfriend died by suicide while they were in college. And it was a wildly traumatic experience for her, of course. And she has really struggled to find her way through this. She has worked really hard. She found an online support group, with other people around her age who lost a loved one to suicide. She, found a therapist that really is helping her work through the trauma and find her way through. But, she felt a similar experience in terms of like, once it was time for everyone to go back to class, the funeral's over, the event is over, people went back with their lives, and she's walking, holding hands with this traumatic grief. And so, we lost our loved ones to suicide about 20, I want to say it was 27 years apart or 25 years apart, something like that. And we had some parallel experiences, and then some experiences where maybe she was getting a little bit more support, and like his JMO's friends are really wrapped around her, and they still are very in close contact with her and check in on her a lot, which makes her still feel close to him, and also gives her some comfort in like, these were the people that grew up with him. So she had some better experiences in that way, but we really wanted to highlight where we are right now, and that it's still hard to talk about. It's still a showstopper. I will tell a quick anecdote that's not in that story, but years ago, I'm married to a musician, and so I'm always in like large groups of people and wonderfully diverse humans, and it's like usually always amazing. Everybody's very like inclusive in the music family. But one time I was with a group of people in a band that my husband was in at the time, and somebody asked something about like, you never talk about your father, you only say my mother lives, blah, blah, blah. And I said, my father died years ago, blah, 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 how he died by suicide. And a person in his band looked at me at that time and said, leave it to Katie to bring down the tone of the room. And I'll never forget it, because it like took all the air out of me. Right. And I just stood there like shocked that someone said that, especially someone in that kind of environment where people are just usually so loving, and like everybody's different, everybody's brain is different in music. And so it was really like a wow. And then for Dorrit to be 25 years old, navigating life in New York City, and she's doing it, and she's trying so hard, and she's doing all the things, and she's putting herself out there, but she still has experiences where if she talks about JMO's loss, it's like the air is sucked out of the room and people just stare. And we all have to get better at talking about it and being able to just say, wow, that sounds really hard. Can you tell me more about JMO? Can you tell me more about your dad? Because that's really all people are looking for. It's like, tell me more. Tell me about what was great. Because when suicide is the cause of death, people assume that everything is terrible. And my father was one of the most generous, charming, like loving people on this planet, who also struggled with his mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're still working on as humans, right? Is being able to know that those two things can coexist.
Yeah. Yeah. And listeners, we're going to get to Katie's book in a moment, but I think this is really important to talk about. And I'll just say that we recently watched the second season of The Pit. I don't know if you've watched that show. And I just felt it was such a good representation of a professional, high functioning, high performing man struggling with mental health and suicidality. And I was so grateful for that representation, because it is something that we so rarely see.
Absolutely. And not to get stuck on television, but I will also say that Shrinking is such a good representation of men going through hard things, from grief to, dementia and struggling. with all kinds of different cognitive decline and different things. And I think that's just a great example of men being able to be themselves in the moment.
Yeah, 1,000%. We're watching that now that my kid is home from university for the summer. We're diving into season 3. We watched one last night. So great show.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about your book, Breaking the Boy Code. And would you kind of start by giving us a bit of a overview about what exactly the book is and what readers could expect in reading it?
Yeah. So the high level overview is that I have done a lot of work with a lot of boys over the years. And there's a lot of research out in the world about how boys and young men continue to be socialized. And it's not just in America, though I could go on a long tangent about what's happening in America, but we won't do that. So it's not, because it's not just in America. Equimundo, which is an organization that does a lot of studies and work around mental health, and particularly male mental health, they did a study on what is called the man box in 2017. The man box is not a new concept, and was not a new concept when they were studying it, but it's essentially like a group of characteristics that men continue to be socialized to adhere to. So stoicism, right? Not talking about feelings and mental health, but being stoic in the face of any sort of upset or distress. Being strong, being a provider, being a problem solver / fixer in the family. So taking on sort of all these pressures. So they did a study on that, on young men and men, to see, and they studied Mexico, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And they wanted to see how were these things holding up in 2017. And what they found was that, yes, absolutely, across the board in all 3 places were young men still socialized to be stoic, to be strong, to be providers. All those pressures that have existed forever, essentially, are continuing to exist. And so that messaging continues to trickle down to young boys. So with an interesting twist was that in Mexico was the one country where men are taking on more of the domestic care with their partners.
Interesting.
So, but not the United States and the United Kingdom. There's sort of neck and neck in sort of that area. So that was kind of interesting. And so this got me thinking about, well, what does it mean to be a boy? And is there a code? Is there a code of ethics that boys follow? And so as I was researching, I really dug into, what do we know about how boys are socialized right now? What do we know about how that's playing out in live time? And so I read every single, academic study I could get my hands on, as you saw in the book, but I also talked to, hundreds of boys. And what I found was that over and over again, teen and young adult boys were saying the same things. They were saying things like, you have to, even if you don't feel strong, you got to show strong, right? This idea of being very physically strong, whether or not you identify as an athlete, is a way to show your strength outwardly, even if inwardly you feel 0% strength. They talked a lot about, in social circles, that there is very much a hierarchy. So people always think about Mean Girls and the hierarchy that exists for girls out there in the world, but people almost never attribute that same set of conditions to males. And the truth is that in social circles, those hierarchies very much exist. And so to get on top, or to work your way up the ladder, you've got to do things like, male posturing, being aggressive, verbal aggression, relational aggression is not just a girl thing. You have to be strong, and you have to be a little bit stronger than the guy ahead of you. And that's how you get to the top. In the meantime, you never narc, never. If you ever say that you're being bullied, you're being aggressed in any way, you're out. It's like, you're done, you're out. You have to be both hypermasculine and heterosexual, but also homophobic and transphobic. Even whether or not you believe in those things, that's how you stay in the group. That's how you climb the hierarchy. Now, this, of course, does not exist in every social group. We know that, there are groups of kids who experience, a wide variety of friendships and relationships. And so I have said the musical community tends to be very inclusive. That is true. And I find, often in musical settings, that hypermasculinity kind of disappears, but it's not totally gone, right? Theater, you see theater kids that hang out together maybe are engaging a little bit less in some of those social norms. But by and large, for the most part, young boys are still experiencing this social norming. And so they're growing up in a time where they still can't say, my life is hard. I'm struggling. This class is too hard. I don't know what to do about this. And they can't talk to each other because they can only posture at surface level.
So, okay, you just shared so much information, and it is a little daunting when you start thinking about all of those pressures. And, there's so many layers to it, the hierarchy, the posturing, the homophobia, it's a lot going on. And I'm wondering if you could talk about it within the context of today, like in this moment of time. To me, it feels like it's getting more and more complicated in terms of access to information and kind of more and more siloed in the way that people consume content and find their in-group. So what are kind of some of the unique challenges in this moment that you're noticing?
Well, I would say technology as a whole. So there's a big push to talk about social media and to ban phones from school. And we don't even necessarily need to get into whether or not that's a good idea. But what I would say is that for boys, it's more than social media. Yes, there are a lot of rabbit holes on YouTube. They're more likely to use YouTube and then TikTok for videos if they're searching for specific topics. But these things also exist in Discord chats, in video game live chats, in video game, chats where they're writing messages to each other. So there's all kinds of WhatsApp. So there's all kinds of ways that boys and young men connect. And this messaging is coming through loud and clear in a lot of these ways. And then it's also even coming in through media still. So like traditional media, right? So, I will tell another story about my son, which I don't usually do, but he went off to the movies over the weekend with his friends. And I typically don't worry about what he's doing because he's like very responsible. It's almost like, could you please make a mistake? He's that kid. But so he went off to the movies and he said, we're going to see Obsession. And I was like, okay, didn't think twice, didn't know anything about Obsession. Well, then he came home and was like, Mom, that movie was like, wow. And so we talked about it. So then I looked it up to know, what it was. And it's like, oh, it's very much incel culture. And like, boy meets girl, boy gets girl obsessed with boy. And then there's a murder and like whatever. I don't know the whole arc of the story. And yes, it's entertainment. But what I wish entertainment would remember in this moment is that they're getting all this information pushed at them through every social media app, through gaming, in live time in classrooms. I mean, teachers are reporting all over the world that this sort of incel culture has come into classrooms, into high school classrooms. And so boys are talking in very misogynistic tones, even to teachers. And so this is everywhere now. And it's very hard to process and understand. And not every young man or boy has a parent that they can go home to and say, what does this mean? I don't know how to feel about this. Pornography has never been easier to access. And the pornography that young people are accessing is more violent. It includes, choking and rape. It's way more violent than it has ever been. And they are seeing it. And when I say easy to access, I'm talking 10 and 11 years old. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you haven't given your kid the phone yet. Someone else has.
Yeah.
And that means they have access. So for parents, it's extraordinarily difficult. It feels impossible at times because even if you feel like you're trying to do everything, right, or in a way that helps your son know what they might encounter, it feels like an uphill battle because somebody else's kid has that and they're going to show it to your kid without context. And then they're not going to know what to do. And, I asked my son when TikTok here in America switched over to the American version, they all had to sign a new agreement that they don't read. And I said, what changed? Did anything change? And he actually deleted TikTok because he was like, it's useless and it's all bad. But I said, what changed? Did anything change for the better? And he said, good news, it's pushing me less porn. Bad news, red pill content all the time.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just take a deep breath because it's a lot. And I'm going to mention for listeners that we've had Amy Lang, who's a sex educator, on the show before, and we did an episode just about pornography, and I'm going to include that in the show notes because it's a good listen. But could we unpack red pill content and incel? Because I think people might have an idea of what it is, but may not really understand what it is in the context of this conversation.
Yes. So yes, incel culture sort of started in one place and shifted to another, but always the theme behind it has been not that they're choosing to be celibate, but that women are choosing for them to be celibate because women are awful and 80% of women only are attracted to 20% of men, which leaves most men completely unable, apparently, to find a mate. So that started as sort of like that is a made up statistic, okay, that is fundamental to the movement, first of all. But so that it started there in that place. It has become very much a culture of misogyny, of just absolute hate and vitriol. So I always say the manosphere is like this giant idea, right? And it's been around for decades. It's not new. It's new that we know more about it now. And it's new that it's absolutely everywhere, but it's not new because like AOL chats back in the day, they were there. They showed up, the minute they could get online, they did. So this is these are thoughts and, people who have been around for a long time having this sort of feeling about women and about, how men and women should flow through society. None of this is new. What's happened is that at that sort of far extreme arc of the manosphere are where like incel culture lives. This is also called black pill content. So this has very much merged into white nationalism, white Christian nationalism specifically, where there is a lot of rhetoric about, both who should be leading in general in the world, how they should be leading, right? And so it's violence, it's very dangerous ideology, homophobia, transphobia, just basically hatred of anyone who's not a white Christian male. That's the sort of long and short of it. And somebody will hit back and say, that's not true. And, they'll prove my point by the way that they will interact with this in the comment section, but I'm used to it. So that's sort of where that arc has landed. It's very dangerous. Because in that part of the manosphere, there's all kinds of talk about, I don't want to say it because I don't want to promote it, but violence. There's a lot of talk about violence as the answer to these so-called problems. So, we hear about red pill content right now and think that that's the worst of the worst. And it's honestly, it's entry level compared to the black pill and the incel culture that's sort of on the other end of it. And it's all a pipeline. And so that's what I caution parents to think about. Most boys are not going to end up down this rabbit hole. I want to say that from the beginning. And most boys are not going to YouTube and TikTok looking to enter these rabbit holes. They're not. They're hopping online, asking questions that you might actually be happy to hear that they're asking, like, how many times a week should I shower? Right? How do I do my hair? How do I do curly hair? What's the trendiest haircut right now? What kinds of, body sprays are popular right now? Like they're looking for advice, hygiene advice, looks advice. Like, how do I, a popular search right now is like, how do I make new friends? How do I talk to a romantic interest, whether that's a boy or a girl or, non-binary person? Like they're looking for information on like, how do I do these things that I'm not learning in live time anymore? Because the problem with all of social media being so pervasive in our lives is that social skills are suffering across the board in person and even among adults, right? This is not just a childhood problem. This is an everybody problem. And so, they're entering with sort of these questions. Therein lie the looks maxers, right? And they have all kinds of names. So there's like looks maxers are doing all the look stuff, but then there's the people who will teach you about finances. And then there's the people who will teach you about how to get a girl. And then, so there are all different kinds of maxing out there. I wish maxing in general would just go away because maybe we don't need to max everything. But looks maxers are sort of the entry level to the red pill. So they're going to tell you, how to chisel your face. And in some cases, it's going to mean actually chiseling your face with a hammer. In other cases, it's going to be bunk science. Hold your tongue to the roof of your mouth. for a certain amount of time per day, and that will chisel your jaw. That is not accurate. This was invented by an orthodontist decades ago. He lost his license. Kids don't know, right? Looks maxers in general are always going to say science-based when they give you a tip. They're not going to say evidence-based. They're not going to say according to the research. They use science-based, which is not, let's just say it's not a thing, right? None of it is science. None of it is science-based. I challenge you to find it in the research and that it hasn't been, debunked. But so that's sort of the entry level. And they end up there by accident. So they ask this question and then TikTok decides, hey, I'm going to flood you with these videos on how to have that chiseled jaw, how to have the perfect hair. In the process of developing relationships with boys and young men, these influencers who are very charismatic, and they look right into the camera and make you feel like they know you, right? They have all these tactics that they use and they have a very clear playbook, so in the process, they will start telling you that, well, you got to earn lots of money. And the way that you earn lots of money is by sports gambling or day trading. And then they'll give you some access code so that they can make money on the back end of you losing all your money. Right. Boys are losing hundreds, thousands of dollars engaging in these things. And then they'll give you the codes or the coupons and, whatever for the perfect shampoo and the perfect deodorant, and, all the things. And so it's influencer culture, right? They don't care about what they're selling. They don't care about the person on the other end of the screen. They're just going to sell you something because they are making so much money.
Yeah.
And that's the disconnect where parents and boys don't necessarily understand. These influencers are making so much money off the backs of boys and young men. And that is all they care about. And if you watch Louis Theroux's documentary, Inside the Manosphere, now he's talking to the most extreme, the people like Clavicular, who's been all over the news, for his tactics and then for being arrested. They're not telling you that they're taking steroids around the clock, that they're doing meth, that they're doing like all kinds of drugs. None of that is being told to the boys who are being told to hammer at their jaws, or to take, creatine and take this supplement and let me sell you this supplement and that supplement. They're poisoning their bodies, with unregulated, unproven supplements that sometimes even counteract each other and don't work well together. If you go to a holistic practitioner, they're going to tell you, what kinds of supplements could help you, but they're also going to tell you, well, don't take this with that. You can only take this and this together because they know what they're talking about, right? Influencer culture, they're just picking one little piece of information from some ad they saw and they're making it into their own version of science.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll have a link to the Inside the Manosphere documentary as well. I thought it was really interesting. And we're going to pivot into how we can help boys grow up with a different sensibility here. But I just think this is important stuff to talk about because a lot of us don't even know these terms. And this isn't, again, as you said, this isn't to scare people, but this is just to be aware of it. One of the things that you said in your CNN piece on looks maxing, which was a great article. I will also have a link to that in the show notes page. You said, if you identify as a male adolescent, good luck curating your algorithm. People often give you that advice, but it's completely unrealistic in teen boy world. You get what they give you. And so it's really hard. And especially when we're talking about neurodivergent kids who may be more vulnerable to trying to find connection, to trying to feel seen and be embraced by part of a community. They may be more susceptible to following influencers who make them feel like they're a part of something bigger. All right. So in your book, again, it's called Breaking the Boy Code. You offer the Modern Boy Toolbox, which is what you share are things that we can start and restart many, many times over in our kids' lives to help our boys thrive. And as I was reading these, and I'm hoping you can explain some of them, it struck me that many of these things that we want to help our boys learn over time about understanding other people's feelings and expressing their feelings, rejecting groupthink, all of these things are often skills that maybe parents listening to this are already kind of working on because we may be explicitly working on social skills and understanding and empathy with our kids. That was a very long-winded way to say, would you share some of the things that you want parents to do with their boys so that we can start opening up these conversations?
Absolutely. So we know from research that boys and young men prefer actually what they call male normative coping, but prefer problem focused coping. So like, here's identify the problem, here's the solution, which a lot of people don't prefer, right? So there's a lot of people that want to really process. And what we find right now is that boys and young men want to know the solutions. So if I'm feeling stressed out because I don't know how to deal with this social situation right now, I don't know how to enter this group, what is the solution to that? And so practicing the solution. So the solution might be, so first you walk up to the group and you stand and you listen and you look around and you make eye contact with one person, right? And then you kind of maintain with that one person, and then you say, or you look near them if making eye contact is hard, and so you sort of make your presence known quietly, right? Then you say, oh, hey, I just wanted to come up and see what y'all are talking about, or something. Like, you give them language, you ask them to practice language they would actually use. This is huge with Gen Z and Alpha, by the way. Like, we talk so differently than young people right now, and not even just the phrases, but just in terms of like casual talk versus like, for me to try to give a kid, very specific language on how to enter a group, I always sound like an old lady and I can hear it coming out of my mouth. So then I'm like, okay, you say it like you, right?
Yeah.
So actually doing that with them, going back and forth, I'm like, well, how would a kid say that? Like, hey, I saw you hanging out and wanted to stop by. Like, what would that be in kid speak right now? Write it down, right? Keep a journal of what they say their kid speak is so that you can get good at it. And then practicing. So giving them opportunities to practice. I know you all know this, but giving them those very specific opportunities. If what they're feeling is angry about something, whatever it is, right? They're just feeling anger bubbling up inside. What is the problem focused solution? Well, is it progressive muscle relaxation, which you can do anywhere, anytime, where you're, tensing and relaxing the muscles until the tension comes out of your body? Yes, it could probably be that. Is it, finding your own space where you can go do like 10 jumping jacks and then reframe your thoughts out loud? Like, I'm feeling angry because I got a C on this test. I don't think it's a fair grade. Deep breath. I'm going to talk to my teacher and try to figure out what went wrong. So giving them these very specific coping skills to get through hard moments. Often what we tell young people is practice deep breathing, do mindfulness. That does not, listen, that works for a lot of people. And as a clinician, I will say there is a very good evidence base behind mindfulness. But for young people in the heat of the moment of, whether it's stress, anger, just distress of any kind, that doesn't feel actionable. That feels like out here, like I have to go and get into this mindful space and think about my brain. And I'm mad right now, so I can't do that. So giving them sort of physical coping skills, like things that they can do, keeping a stress ball in your pocket. I recommend that to kids across the gender spectrum all the time. Just keep a small stress ball in your pocket so that when you need it, you can pull it out and you can help yourself to, stress and release the tension and get that physical tension out of your body. We know that boys and young men feel that tension very strongly inside their bodies. So helping them do something physical to get it out is important.
Mm-hmm. So really, it sounds like supporting our kids in developing, our boys specifically, in the context of this conversation, in developing kind of their social and emotional intelligence is really kind of the most protective factor so that they are less vulnerable to getting kind of swept up in these, what might seem like easy solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, a big thing is, I call it support mapping. So helping boys, we do this with girls intuitively. Well, who can you talk to if you're upset? But we don't do this with boys. So support mapping. If they are at school, who is the person that they actually trust inside of that building to talk to about something hard? It could be anybody. It could be someone working in the cafeteria. It could be the crossing guard. All kinds of folks work in schools, and kids choose all kinds of people to be their people. So help map out, here's someone you can talk to if you are feeling the feelings, any feelings, and you don't know what to do with those feelings. Like, who's your adult that supports you? Who's another peer that you feel like you can just at least sit next to and like vent to, or just sit with and like be together while you're feeling distressed? What can you do? What are you allowed to do? That's the other thing, is like, what will schools actually let you do? But then helping them negotiate with a teacher, like, can they get a hall pass and go take a lap around the school and come back? Can they get a hall pass, go to the front office, check in with that person, come back? Like, what are the strategies that the school will actually allow them to use so that they are, getting that opportunity to connect with their trusted person, and then also just like get their bodies moving so that they can think and not have like these big giant reactions silently and alone. And that also encourages help seeking. So really, can they pass a note to the teacher? Can they send a note on whatever they're using, Schoology? Can they send a note through there that says, I'm really struggling right now, I need extra help? That's a great silent strategy where a kid can connect with a teacher and get the help that they need. And so we have to like really innovate in our brains and think about how they can make themselves known and their needs known.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll wrap up because I realize we're going a little long, but I could talk with you for hours and you have a very busy life. So you have a chapter in the book called Rebranding Sensitivity, where you talk about the unique reality of raising boys who are highly sensitive or who might struggle with rejection, sensitive dysphoria. And those are two profiles that I know a lot of listeners are identifying with. Can you just talk a little bit about what makes this a little more complicated, since these are particularly tricky things to navigate if our kids are already like have this heightened sense of being criticized or not seen for who they are?
Absolutely. And this is a huge issue that's close to my heart because I've worked for so long with so many kids that go through this. And so what I would say is this: our good friend, Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, is fond of saying, name it to tame it. And you've heard that phrase. I know you all have heard that phrase. And I like to take that phrase and think about sensitivity in that way. Helping kids understand who they are and how they operate and flow through the world is really important, because when they know, you know what, I do take in the feelings around me. And part of rejection sensitivity dysphoria is not just like, oh, I'm being criticized and that feels awful. It's I'm being criticized. The tone in this room is very negative. That's seeping into me because I actually have a really high level of empathy. Other people are being criticized around me. I'm taking that in as well. And so it's very complicated because these kids, they're like sponges and they soak up all of the negative or all of the positive. It doesn't matter. And so they feel all of this like in a huge way inside of their bodies, inside of their brains. And so helping them understand that that's how they operate and that they can learn to develop their own scripts inside of their minds. And it's not just reframing, right? And it's definitely not positive thinking. It's neutral thinking. This person has said this, and it made me feel awful, like they hate me. They don't hate me. They're having a hard time right now. It's just neutral thinking. There's a huge power in neutral thinking, and nobody talks about that. It's never, it's like talked about in therapy offices, but that's a thing that hasn't made it right onto the big world wide web yet. So, really helping them embrace like, I'm feeling this because I know that I'm sensitive to this kind of feedback. And also I know that person doesn't hate me. And also I know I'm good. Like I'm a good person. I'm a nice person. And right now I'm feeling it because all these things are happening. So helping them with their inner dialogue, because kids who are highly sensitive and kids who have, who experience rejection sensitivity have this chatter in their brains. They'll say it. There's this, it's like my brain is always talking to itself and it's saying all these things. They'll literally describe it that way. And so helping them, I always say personify it. So, no matter what age, right? Draw a picture of it. Who is it? Name it, because you can talk back to it when you name it. So I'll say like, oh, I call my guy Bob. Like if Bob is acting up and, super criticizing, because I experienced this as a kid, then I can talk back to him and go, knock it off, Bob. This is not about me. This is about that person. Now I'm 51 years old, so I can say it that way. A 15-year-old can't. They can't likely access that level of assertiveness inside their brains yet, but they can start to say like, hey, that's not fair. I don't like that kind of thinking. So learning to converse with it, not try and stop it. Thought stopping is not a good thing. It's working through the thoughts. And so personify it, draw it if you can, name it, give it the personality that it has, which is cranky and not very kind, and then learn to deal with it.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, we can't ban thoughts. They're always going to be there. So I love that idea. Okay. So there's so much more we could go into, but we are going to wrap it up. So I want to name the book again. It's called Breaking the Boy Code, the new playbook for raising resilient boys. It's good to be aware of the world that our boys are growing up in, just so we can just be tuned in, not be necessarily hyper vigilant, but be really just aware and notice, pay attention to our boys and keep the conversations going. So Katie, where would you like people to check out your work and connect with you?
I think in terms of connecting, I love Instagram the most. So I probably spend the most of my time there at Dr. Katie Hurley, LCSW is my handle on Instagram. And you can go to my website, practicalkatie.com. All of my books and work are kind of listed there. And yeah, find me wherever. I just love to hear from people.
That's great. Thank you. And listeners, I will have a very extensive show notes page for this episode with all those resources as well. So congratulations on the book. I'm so grateful for you putting this work out there and supporting families and parents the way that you do. And thank you so much for everything you shared today.
Thank you for supporting me.